Hi, everybody, and welcome to the sixth module in Journalism 101, Critical Analysis of the Mass Media, the online version, and I'm your professor, Dr. Paul Trout. This week we turn to a new area of consideration in this course, reflected by the evolution of this textbook over time. This is a different chapter than we've seen often in courses like this, and it's timely that we address some of the concerns given the power that you all hold in your hands in terms of your smartphones and your other pieces of technology that allow you so readily to access information, download information, manage information, play back and access that information, and transfer that information to others. So this week, we're talking about some of the larger principles, often with historical treatment in terms of information capacity, information overload, information usability, and interactive media. So let's move on into the first part of a two-part video series. The first part of this chapter is going to talk about information storage, and this section deals a lot with how information has been stored historically. And you'll get to read about that and read about how information was stored going back into ancient times. What I would like to do is simply run some comparisons between, say, examination of the music industry and your generation and my generation when I was your age, just to show you comparisons just in a short period of time, 40, 50 years. In terms of where we've moved on a number of dimensions that are discussed in this chapter. The first section in this part of the chapter discusses longevity. Storage media, in some ways, have improved over time. In some ways, they haven't. I have traveled the world. I have taught in foreign countries. A couple of summers ago, I was visiting Austria, and I was up on the Danube, and I visited a 1,000-year-old Benedictine abbey. That was a school, a monastery, a place where clergy went and dedicated their lives to the church, also to knowledge. And I visited a 1,000-year-old library in that facility, and I saw books that predated the Gutenberg Bible. All right? Books have tremendous longevity. They survive and last longer than many storage media in our time. The primary, when I started listening to music as a person your age, the primary medium was a record, a disc. And if you've played records, if you've ever seen one, you know that you drop a needle on the groove, and in time the record does wear out. It gets scratchy and noisy because the fidelity of the record is essentially damaged a little bit every time you play that music. You play music primarily through playback of digital storage files or digital files that you download from one or more music websites, or that you burn or upload from older traditional storage media in terms of music. You may not have known that a typical digital music file really does not have considerable shelf life. I have read statistics, for example, that say that all the books in the Library of Congress that are gradually being converted over to digital files, that we can expect most digital files to begin to degrade, to essentially lose their fidelity after about 20 years. So longevity is kind of a controversial issue when we look at evolving technologies, because some of these technologies, while at face value appear to be perfectly stable in terms of longevity, they may not really be so. Capacity, all right? Going back to that library that I visited a couple of summers ago, this is just a huge, big physical space, and books take up space on shelves. And one of the things we know in terms of current systems of musical playback, for example, is that you can store a ton of information on a very, very small device and play that back. In my time, we would have record collections, and they would take up large spaces in our dormitory rooms. We also had tape media. We had cassettes. We also had 8-tracks, okay, and people had suitcases, literally suitcases, where they would store these 8-track playback devices, these tapes, okay, scattered all over their car. All right, so one area where we probably have improved a little bit is in terms of, with digitization and the miniaturization and the capacity to compress information, we find ourselves with a little bit more room in our dorm rooms. Portability, of course, has increased over time. These old books from this monastery in Austria are heavy. They're hard to cart around. Portability in my time in terms of music, well, yes, cassettes were light and you could stack a lot of them in your backpack or in your duffel bag and move around that way. But compare that to what you all enjoy in terms of the music that you store, or the music that I store on my iPod when I want to go work out. Okay, so we've seen vast developments and improvements in terms of portability. Accessibility, books locked up in monasteries are hard for people often to get their hands on. I wasn't able to touch any of these books. They don't want me holding these things because they are fragile. The text is preserved quite well, and if I was a historian looking at medieval book printing, or looking at the work of certain authors, if I'd put on gloves, I probably would have been able to gain access to this information. But accessibility is made more difficult in that situation. When I wanted to go buy music as a young person, there was no internet. I couldn't go online and find my favorite artist's music. I had to go to a record store, or I had to join a record club or a tape club through direct mail and the U.S. mails, and receive my music over the counter after I purchase it, or in the mails as a bundled package of new cassettes for play. Reproducibility. We know in the old days that books had to be hand copied, and you've read in earlier chapters how the printing press sped up that process. Increased rapid dissemination and duplication of books and texts. Reproducibility was somewhat improved with my generation, in that if we had a record and we wanted to play that record, we could connect an electronic tape player or a recorder to it, and we could pipe the signal from that record as it was being played by the tone arm and the needle on that record player. I know I just sound ancient here. And we could create and burn, if you will. We didn't call it that, but we could create a cassette of that music. Today, of course, it's fairly instantaneous, and you're able to download, copy, shovel off to other people tunes that you enjoy. You're also going to read in this chapter about user interfaces. User interface is this junction between a medium and the people who use it. And you'll read in this chapter, and I think it's safe to say that interfaces have become quite interesting, in part because of conglomeration and because of digitization. You now have a device in your hands that allows you to play back a number of different traditional media. You can listen to music. You can look at still photos. You can read text. You can watch videos or film, all on the same screen. So in some ways we see a fusing, if you will, of multiple media, okay, into one playback medium or one playback device. So we see this increased junction, if you will, between a medium, not just one medium, but many media, and the one person who may use it. You're also going to read in this chapter about what your authors argue is an interface transformation that has empowered the user. And my take on this is a little bit different. There is this widespread thinking, and you'll read about it in this chapter, that having your fingertips, or one set of fingertips, on a device that allows you to go out into the internet, to access information, to download information, to cut and paste additional information into it, to send that information off elsewhere, that empowers you as a user. Well, yes, in one way it does. Just as our ability to take videotapes at a much earlier age and pull out pieces of video and reshape the story and add new video. It took a longer period of time to do that because we didn't have digital media, but we could essentially transform and change stories the way we wanted to. We could mix music and take samples that we liked from various albums and artists and create our own party tapes, our own dance tapes, if you will. But one of the things that I think we need to keep and be mindful of in this day and age is that somebody's always behind the creation and the architecture that drives us forward when we access these pieces of information, when we access this form of entertainment. For example, for those of you who go out and do YouTube, every time you go look at a video on YouTube, you'll see that other stuff is suggested in terms of what you might want to watch. There are programmers, folks who write code, who are working with the principals behind the designers who are the principal people controlling that kind of interface. And they are working constantly to find out what that cutting edge is between finding out what you like to watch and always making sure that perhaps you'll watch something a little bit similar to it or maybe a little bit different. Because the goal here, of course, is to keep your interest in a website like YouTube, but have you sample new things, because that means you'll be encountering more and more advertising that also pops up in those kinds of environments. So be mindful that this is not a control-free situation. Yes, you have more flexibility, but your choices and the ways in which you control access to this information are, if anything, becoming more and more owned, if you will, or controlled by people who are operating behind the scenes. That is the end of this first section on information overload, usability. We'll talk more about interactivity in part 2. Thanks for watching.